Thank you. We'll now go into the Jeanne H. Lucas Luncheon, the State of the North Carolina Black Alliance. The North Carolina Black Alliance is taking our work to a new horizon in 2022. Our intimate engagement with North Carolina's Black communities has led us to develop new and updated programming to meet the needs of the community. We are listening and responding with intention. As we enter into the midterm elections, supporting voters during election cycles is the heartbeat of our work. Not only are there important congressional races, but there are so many local races taking place that were rescheduled due to delays in the 2020 biennial census. The North Carolina Black Alliance has a robust Get Out the Vote program that began formation in 2021. Through our Hbcu think tank, Code Red Redistricting Initiative, and our partnership with Black Voters Matter, we have built an army of trained voting advocates who are ready to support the communities and make their voices heard in November. Coming up next is a conversation between two key leaders for the North Carolina Black Alliance, Mr. Marcus Bass, Deputy Director, and Ms. Lamisha Willington, our Deputy Director of Programs. They will share the state of the North Carolina Black Alliance with you, providing you with a view of what's to come.
I think this has been one of the best organized and well-delivered virtual events that I've attended. I do think engagements as this are necessary for our collective organizations so we can be specific in our actions and our involvement in our state legislative process.
Redistricting is the process, as the name implies, of redrawing district maps. That's what it is. And I say that by way of kind of answering your other question, which is gerrymandering. And so gerrymandering.
Why are they drawing these districts? Because each year populations change. And so with the change in population, you want to make sure all the districts are kind of equal so that everybody's vote matters.
The North Carolina Black Alliance has created this platform for voters to receive credible, up-to-date information regarding voting options and to provide clear guidelines on how you can proactively engage in the vote. Whether you early vote or vote on election day, we want to protect voters at the polls.
For decades, North Carolinians have been exposed to per- and polyfluoroalkyl, otherwise known as PFAS. It's clear that getting more information about the health effects of PFAS must be made a priority for our people.
I hope you all have enjoyed this portion of the North Carolina Black Summit virtual experience. Wasn't the sign just fantastic? To think about the legacy, the history that has brought us to this moment, even though our theme for this year is building Black power in uncertain times, I think the reality is we have a drumbeat, not just as a Black Alliance, but as a Black community that has kept us relevant despite so much oppression and suppression. And I'm just excited as Deputy Director to work with such a dynamic team of individuals, as well as the leadership in the North Carolina Black Alliance. And thank you so much to our former chair and secretary of the Black Alliance, Commissioner Viola Harris, for the tireless work that you do across this state. I also want to take time to recognize another tireless leader in North Carolina doing efforts across the state, and allow for greetings, the Deputy Director of Programming for the North Carolina Black Alliance and Deputy Director of Advanced Carolina, Ms. Lamisha Whittington.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director Marcus Bass. It is so good to be here and just really encouraged to be in space with you all for this year's 2022 Black Summit, Building Black Power in Uncertain Times. And so just really excited to join Marcus as we deliver a State of the Alliance, exactly what we have been busy doing in community, in loving and in leadership alongside community leaders, state leaders, and of course, our fearless Black electeds across the state to be able to incorporate education year-round to support our outreach in voting and reaching the ballot. And so Marcus, I'll turn it back over to you and then I'll pick it up from there.
So we've been tasked with providing you an update on the State of the Alliance, and there's no better time as we go into this next stage of recovery from a still existing pandemic. There have been a lot of steps that the Black Alliance has taken to make sure that we are providing relevant responsiveness and an understanding of what the issues are so we can make the best decisions in our elected offices, we can make the best decisions in our community organizations, and we can make the best decision in the ballot box. I think the timing of the Black Alliance, along with our theme, lends itself to talk about how much uncertainty we had coming into 2022. Just a mere fact that here we are 2 days into the start of early voting. We had no idea when we planned for the Black Summit this year that we would be in the middle of the midterm primary. For those of you that recall, the primary was actually supposed to take place in March. But after much litigation around the fairness of maps on a congressional level, a state level, we now have an opportunity to cast our vote. But there have been some steps in between the period of pandemic to help us get here. And so the information that we're going to share is going to really help provide context around the state of the Alliance. I think it's important to note that our foundings of the Alliance and the issues that we have championed across the board are not just organic to our community at whole, but when you look at the issues of environmental racism, of access to healthcare, economic empowerment, education, when you look at what's happening across the state in regards to criminal justice reform, and especially when we look at what is happening across the state of North Carolina in regards to our political system, we have a notion and are urging as faith institutions, as Black college students from across the state, elected officials, and as civic and service organizations to be in this tapestry, to be in commitment together, because we need to make sure that we are not just creating individual issues, but a connective process that helps us chart a course forward. In this conversation, we cannot stop without paying homage and respect to those individuals that have lost their lives in the midst of COVID-19. These individuals, like Commissioner Coleman, have been on the vanguard of change. And in the midst of the pandemic, we've lost a lot of soldiers on the front lines. And we want to make sure that as we are moving forward, we are following the example, as was stated in the remarks and conversations that we've heard, not just in the individuals that are still with us, but in the individuals that are recent examples of living legends. And in the same regard, we are also bringing in newly elected leaders. Here you'll see pictured some of the newest leaders in Wake County from a state level all the way down to a local level, all committed to bringing Black political power. And when we think about our roles in municipal offices across the state, when we think about what we've had to do and the challenges in COVID-19, there is no better time than now than for us to get on one page, especially as it comes down to rebuilding in the midst of the pandemic. You see, the 2022 election for the North Carolina Black Alliance is not just about the congressional level or legislative level races, but we understand that there's key power down the ballot. And when we talk about rebuilding in the midst of the pandemic, we have to realize that the situations that a lot of our communities face have been here long before the pandemic. And so as we approach this 2022 election, we have to remember where we were just 2 years ago. We've been on, since the last Black Summit, a listening tour across the state of North Carolina, talking to individuals in various areas of business and various areas of organization, of course, in our Black elected official arena around the challenges that have come in the midst of COVID-19. Those conversations from 2020 transition into 2021 to supporting understanding of the huge amount of stimulus funds that are coming down the pipe for residents across North Carolina. These funds through the American Rescue Plan, the state and local fiscal recovery funds, the education recovery funds. These funds are, for the first time in our history, the largest transfer of wealth that has taken place in recent history. There will never be a urging of this amount of funding across the state. And so we've been involved in sessions across North Carolina, talking to over 155 participants in these different county conversations, and anchoring organizations have helped us break down for individuals how these funds are used in community. This photo gallery shows you just a few of the stops that we made in this COVID-19 recovery conversation. And we were excited to be able to bring together Black elected officials, policy experts in the midst of COVID-19, and to talk about solutions for communities that are still dealing with hurricane, environmental racism issues, as we'll hear later on in the conversation, access to education, broadband internet, and some of the issues that we're seeing even now in the short and long term represent a continuation of what was stated earlier in the summit, this pathway to victory, this step-by-step process of understanding the needs of aid in this moment of homelessness and housing displacement, making sure that we are lifting that as a continuation of concern, understanding how we build from a space of not just legislative advocacy, but making sure that we're providing support through the policies that we're seeing enacted. We have a state budget that was just passed in 2022. For the first time in short memory, North Carolina has finally passed a budget. Now, the next step is making sure that long-term care, long-term relief, and then a look ahead as we continue to deal with the aftermath of a improperly coordinated or funded census and election administration, keeping our eye on the prize at every level. And so this highlights some of the concerns of COVID-19. And immediately after these conversations, the Black Alliance dared to go out in community, helping support COVID-19 testing, helping support vaccine distribution, helping provide aid and relief for communities, and making sure that we kept in mind the future, our young people that are hanging in the balance without being in school for an entire year, coming back into in-person learning. We have to make sure that we are looking after the holistic child, having conversations with elected leaders across the board about how we can create substantive solutions on a local level to help meet the need has been an important factor. And in the gap, you all, members of the North Carolina Black Alliance, have made sure that you have advocated not just around the impending needs, but the longstanding needs in the aftermath of COVID-19. You'll see here Representative Reeves standing in the background. You'll see Representative Linda Cooper Suggs, a part of a conversation around access to funding, critical funding for education that is a longstanding gap and a 30-year lawsuit around funding for education in the state of North Carolina. We've been working to make sure not just at a legislative level, but at a local level. Our school board members, shout out to the North Carolina Alliance of Black School Board members, and our local leaders across the state know the imperative and what these funds can do on top of the American Rescue Plan funding. We also have been in conversation in this midst of disinformation to support organizations that are doing the work across the state to make sure that we are talking about the individual elements of racism and how we got here. Here you'll see us joined by one of the great leaders in the social justice movement right here in North Carolina, Reverend Nelson Johnson, as they take part in a statewide tour around truth, justice, and reconciliation. And the North Carolina Black Alliance has been committed to ensuring that our Black elected officials are in these spaces, figuring out new language to talk about the harms that have been existing in our community for so long. But in this moment of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to make sure that our real history and our unique story hasn't been lost. And speaking of our story and those being lost, we've worked tirelessly across the state to make sure that individuals that are justice involved are brought to a space of freedom and exoneration. We were proud to stand with leaders like the NAACP and Forward Justice to cry out for pardon for Dante Sharp, an individual that had recently been released after years of serving his time, but was still not able to vote until 2020. We were with him in 2020 to make sure that he was able to cast his first vote since being released. And then we were with him at the very beginning of this year, pleading with Governor Cooper to make sure that a pardon was provided within the time of holiday season to exonerate Dante Sharp and others. And we were proud to have our very own Lamisha Whittington Kaminsky speaking at this event and also making the context between the understanding of criminal justice reform and environmental racism. And at this time, it gives me pleasure to turn it over to LA for more updates in this conversation around the state of the Alliance. Lamisha.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And so, as Marcus has already eloquently stated, our issue areas, our commitment statements center around economic justice, environmental justice, crime and justice, and of course, our voter outreach and engagement. But when we talk about voter education, we also have to ground where the issues and the impacts facing community. One of those top issues are environmental injustices. And so when we talk about environmental injustice, we know that 50% of all people of color in this nation actually live only 2 miles away from a toxic waste site. As we began to do research within the organization, we realized more and more that the impact that we saw, whether it be disaster relief and recovery, affordable housing or the lack thereof, the lack of healthy housing, all came down to systemic and institutional racism and discrimination. We saw examples in our research that elevated the fact that when we look at redlining, historically, the impacts in our community that was lending practices that were discriminatory. Banks didn't actually actually give loans to our communities, what that meant is our housing, our infrastructures actually couldn't be renovated. And so when those disasters and those storms came, well, guess what? Our homes couldn't withstand the impact. That's environmental injustice. When we talk about the fact that now developers who don't have community in mind, but really just thinking about the capitalism and the structure as they displace or as they gentrify, that's environmental injustice. And so what we have done is a holistic approach of North Carolina Black Alliance, and I'm very proud to just be in the midst of this work with a great team, is we have priority issue areas that include water, disaster relief and recovery, energy justice, and industrial corporate pollution. I really want to give credit and a shout out to the North Carolina Association of Black County Officials. The North Carolina Black Alliance nearly 20 years ago saw in a vision and sat down with Black electeds to think about what were the key issue statements that held the most impact in our communities. And through their vision, through their foresight, they said access to healthcare and environmental justice, and laid the groundwork for us nearly 20 years later to do this work at this breadth, depth, and level. And so just being very encouraged, but also want to give honor to the leaders that allow for us to do this work at this depth, at this analysis. And so these issue areas, when we talk about clean water, when we talk about disaster relief and recovery, we saw that after Hurricane Florence, it came to elevation on a national media platform that North Carolina, specifically Southeast, a portion of North Carolina, had been dumped in our Cape Fear River, our largest watershed, 1.5 million people. Our water was contaminated because a corporation dumped a contaminant in our water. And so we've been in community educating, informing, but walking alongside community leaders. And so just in the past several years, over 2,000 community leaders have been trained, either directly through our workshops, webinars, actually going directly into community and partnering around training community leaders. What is PFAS? What is that water contamination? How about lead, and where is it pervasive in our school system and impacting our children? How are we looking at the fact that returning citizens are already coming back home from time in incarceration in a carceral state, that they're now not only trying to build their political power, understanding the laws around being able to vote, but also understanding that their water was contaminated in that prison or in that jail facility that has now created health disparities. And hopefully everyone heard our North Carolina Black Alliance Healthcare Coordinator, Karita Giddings, previously really laying out an elaboration on the healthcare disparities, the lack of access to healthcare. It is all intertwined. We were very excited to launch our environmental justice mini grant cohort. We were able to actually deliver and resource over 12 organizations across the state, from the mountains to the Piedmont Triad to the east, with actual mini grant support to be able to deepen the scope of their environmental justice work. So we had such organizations that were able to actually deliver fresh food and produce from local Black farmers to tent cities in Greensboro, working with Bennett College, one of our other mini grant cohort participants. We were able to actually support REPS, another organization, to be able to conduct research to test the water in, again, prison and jail facilities. These are just some examples of the mini grant cohort and just the prolific work that they're doing. Again, as I mentioned, these are just some of our organizations that we've supported, from Democracy Green to Bennett College to REPS to Apple FSI Ministries, but dozens of others. And we have actually opened our mini grant cohort again this year. We've partnered with over 300 organizations in just 2 years to shape policy, demand COVID-19 funds, and connect communities with relief. And in addition to that water contamination I mentioned, the North Carolina Black Alliance filed 2 petitions, one going into a lawsuit now to the United States Environmental Protection Agency to challenge the fact that we need our water tested and our communities cleaned up and our communities supported with clean water alternatives. In addition to that, we were very honored to actually deliver an environmental justice training to upward 50 governors and their respective staff through the National Governors Association. Taking, again, the historic and prolific work of North Carolina, I want to honor that this year's the 39th anniversary of the environmental justice movement, thanks to the elders and the ancestors of Warren County that made this work possible. We have been able to add to that work in the 2022 going forward by encouraging, but also informing informing other electeds across the nation of how to provide resources, how to provide responsible economic development, and support communities of color with, guess what, renovated, restored, and remediated communities from corporate contamination. Last year, we worked with many of you all to launch our inaugural North Carolina Black Alliance NC State Unfair. We titled this because it was during the NC State Fair in the fall, but we identified that there was a lot of unfair happenings in agriculture and, again, environmental injustices in our communities, and we wanted to elevate exactly and examine what those impacts were. And so we worked with North Carolina Black electeds, appointed officials, community leaders, state government authorities to talk about everything from water to air to utilities and exactly the infrastructure that was needed to be able to support our communities. Going through a few more events, just really excited. When we talk about informing community, we've been able to work around ARPA funds, working with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to actually bring real-time, live instructional information to communities, the community leaders, of how to apply for that funding to remediate, again, their infrastructures, to remediate our schools, to remove that lead, to remove that PFAS. So not only have we been educating and informing and walking alongside leaders in the community, we've also been providing a connection as a conduit with state government to say, well, this is how we can get that resource so you can move from information to application. We also connect our support with not just the water contamination, but how to keep the lights on. We know that in COVID-19, utilities and rental and housing evictions has been at its highest. 1 in 3 Black households are in utilities arrears, meaning they're past due on their light bills. And so we were able to hold town halls, 3 to be total, to be exact, and actually inform community of exactly what were the moratoriums, what was the funding available, and to connect communities with the HOPE program and the leaders of that program, to connect folks with actual resources to help them keep the lights on and stay sheltered in place. And this work has led to us being able to be appointed by the North Carolina Utilities Commission to develop a low-income assistance program for North Carolinians, working alongside Duke Energy and over 20 other advocacy organizations. And we've also been appointed by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to serve on the Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board, again, to talk about how can we move resources and identify and amplify what community leaders and our electeds are already in the course of moving. How can we support that more dynamically as a state with moving environmental justice in our communities? And these are just snapshots of our work and our team as we have moved again across the state, being in a virtual capacity, being as actually a recently medical published journal that was actually published by our program and policy director, Jovita Lee, looking at our team being in community at a block party, whatever that may mean. We're supporting community with information, but being engaged, whether it's virtual or in person. In addition to our environmental justice work, we also looked at analysis of seeing that our local communities have, again, been gerrymandered for years. And we've heard the recent conversation through the Black Summit this year, exactly that context and what it means. Our political vote, our ability to engage in the ballot being severely severed and predetermined by voting maps, by lawmakers who don't have our best intentions at heart. And so in order to, again, ground this information in community, we developed the Code Red Redistricting program. And through this program, we were able to launch a series of trainings in communities. Really excited about this because our trainings on average had over 100 community leaders in space, which is historic for local redistricting community events. We were able to engage with 37 counties and be able to be in relationship and engage around actual letter writing drafts, public hearing, and making sure we were supporting folks actually turning in comments for their public hearings during their local redistricting efforts, all the way to engaging on the state and congressional map drawing level. We were able to really support community, and that is still ongoing to this year. Recently, we held a incredible redistricting and voting engagement seminar with the UAW and really supporting our local unions in addition to the local NAACP and other community membership organizations that have really led the gamut in fair voting for our communities for years, but deepening again that analysis around what is redistricting and how can we be involved long term. And in addition to that, we've been instrumental in connecting our U.S. Southern leaders, just bringing in and honoring legends, living legends that are still with us today that actually created fair redistricting in other states, being able to connect that with our leaders here in North Carolina to bring a broader analysis across the state. So this is just a brief snapshot of the work, and hopefully being able to encapsulate that in this kind of really brief snapshot, but just really elaborating that the work continues. And this is what it means to build Black power in uncertain times. And Marcus, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, LA. There is no question that we have been on the front lines just as much as our elected officials and community members, and we can't go forward without making sure that we spotlight our youth engagement. I want to thank the members of the North Carolina Black Alliance for the tireless work you do ensuring that there is a pipeline to future involvement for the political process for our young people. And many of you have supported a lot of events and activities in the midst of the pandemic. And as Lamisha mentioned, we are now in the position to make sure that we are activating an external sense of engagement, teaching folks how to come back together and work together after this moment of the immediacy of the pandemic, and making sure that we don't forget our students in the process. The North Carolina Black Alliance was proud to have held our 8th annual North Carolina HBCU think tank in the 2021 cycle. And as we prepare for 2022, it's outstanding to think about the number of leaders that we have in the pipeline, serving in student government organizations, serving in Divine Nine organizations across North Carolina. And we're committed now to make sure that we're doubling our efforts, not just with the HBCUs, but with our Black college students as well, ensuring that regardless of what campus you attend, community college or four-year university, you have the access. And you'll see some of our team members that have shared in that legacy. A lot of our members of our team are actually products of HBCUs. A lot of you as elected officials are as well. But regardless, if you attended a HBCU or you're dealing with situations from a PWI standpoint, as a Black college student, you have a voice and you have a vote. And we have partnered with our students to make sure that they have access to the ballot, and also at the same time, giving them creative spaces to work and talk together. Here you'll see our recently held Biscuits and Ballots event that took place during the Dreamville Festival. And you'll see the students engaged in a political process, talking about the difference between what the historical message has been and what they need to see in this current frame of democracy. We have to, as the North Carolina Black Alliance, engage these communities now. And the best way that we're doing that as we start early voting is our 2 highlighted campaigns for GOTV. Commence the vote for our college, high school students in community college settings, and graduates across the state of North Carolina. During this period of early voting, the North Carolina Black Alliance is asking individuals to commence the vote, wearing their graduation cap, going to their early voting polling site, casting their ballot, and right outside the polling location, snapping a photo, using the hashtag commence the vote, sending that to us. And we are sharing this information across the state of North Carolina. As so many times we've heard, why aren't young people engaged? We need to start speaking to the young people that are engaged. If we continue to speak to those that aren't doing what we need them to do, we'll never motivate the ones that are actively engaged in transforming democracy. And the commence to vote strategy is one of the things that we're proud to make sure that we bring to the forefront in this midterm election cycle. As always, we have our historical program for voter engagement in our faith community, the Souls to the Polls program. And this year, we're proud to partner with the North Carolina NAACP, the Council of Churches, the General Baptist State Convention, to make sure that you have the information to mobilize your community. When we talk about voter mobilization, there are elements of voter safety protection up and down that process. In 2021, we were able to harness a hybrid format of Souls to the Polls, asking folks to caravan to the election site in fear of not wanting to create an additional stress in community because of COVID-19, having individuals caravan to the polls. We crafted a stroll to the polls method. Well, this year, we're going back to our original formation and still allowing individuals that want to caravan in unison instead of marching the ability to do so. While we're talking about our faith work, we couldn't have done this work at the intersection of public health, at the intersection of community interest and faith without our community partners. Here you'll see Brian Dawson, K97.5, flanked by Do It Right Together's Al Swan. In the midst of COVID-19, we were able to stand up events like this to provide not just assistance, but information and education for individuals that are trying to figure out how to provide resources to the community. These events that we were conducting as a part of our COVID-19 response effort, have sounded the alarm around the long-term effects of COVID-19 in community and making sure that we're making the connections. You'll see recent KMAC from the sports shop here flanking one of our events and making sure that individuals at every level of engagement understand the importance, not just in building back from the mid of pandemic, but also understanding the political impetus for doing that as well. And we're proud to have members of the Black Alliance involved in this process as well. And so for us in this moment too, one of the things that we're seriously considering is how we go into a strategic planning process. In this moment of uncertainty, the one thing that we can do is work together to ensure that we are touching each and every single fabric of community correctly. And this year, the North Carolina Black Alliance was proud to partner with Frontline Strategies to be a part of a 18-month strategic planning process. During this strategic planning process, we're bringing stakeholders together from all facets of the North Carolina Black Alliance and engage with Frontline Strategies and Frontline Solutions in an 18-month process. I want to give a shout out also to NC Reg, Dr. Toms and Dr. Askew, the group that is also facilitating the community version of this. We have conducted at this point our first listening tour with community leaders in the Triangle area. And Lamar Bryan, our Triangle Regional Coordinator, did a fantastic job of bringing folks together. But this is mirrored on a state level as we work with our board and other stakeholders to really figure out the next stage of the Black Alliance for the future. And at the end of this conversation, you'll have the opportunity to complete a survey as a Black elected official and talk about, or as a community leader and talk about, what you want to see the Black Alliance do to help support you in this next iteration, in this next phase of the Black Alliance. We couldn't have done this work across the state without our team of individuals that helped us on the back end and are helping us across the state of North Carolina, and you, our members that have showed up in the midst of COVID-19, helped support us in so many ways, and even virtually, when we talk about justice on the ballot, showed up at these community forums across the state. Here you'll see in Wake County, the virtual forum for Wake County Sheriff, and we understand importantly how much access is, even in this moment of transitioning from online engagement now to hybrid engagement. We need to make sure that we're providing spaces for individuals to see you and see you in positions talking about the issues in a real way. We're excited about the forward progression that North Carolina has taken, and it's not just doom and gloom. We have the opportunity in this early voting season to bring young people together like never before, to distribute aid and relief in community like never before. And at the very least, we can still pass out water at the polls, like unlike other states. And in this moment of the transition between spring and summer, we have to make sure that we're doing these things and being in alignment at every single level. Here you see photos of our members of the Black Alliance flanked by the visit to the Triad region by our President Biden, as well as Governor Roy Cooper and our very own Secretary Michael Regan. The importance of this election is not lost on any level in regards to where North Carolina is placed. And the North Carolina Black Alliance is positioned in that fight. And then we also are in this moment, not just talking about the congressional level concerns, but we're also talking about the impact of an unfair map process and what that means to individuals as we're having to see the Black community primary itself in ways that typically we have not been accustomed to. And so like never before, making the connection between the redistricting process and the election, and then talking in spaces where we know candidates need to be able to talk to constituents. Here we are in Goldsboro, North Carolina, Wayne County, just this past weekend with a candidate forum, nonpartisan candidate forum hosted by the NAACP. And being able to make the connection between the fair maps and the fair fight is very important moving forward. We could not have done this work, including this virtual experience, without a core team of people behind the scenes making it happen. And I want to give a special shout out to DCL Management and our fearless CFO, COO, Dion Lester, for all the tireless work that you do on the operations end and making sure that we are tight and right, and making sure that over 200 of you that have registered for the Black Summit were able to come together and get your kit in advance of the Black Summit. So the information that you see in your boxes and the materials, even down to your t-shirts, was helped pulled together by a team of individuals that, as was stated earlier, you may never see on the front end, but you'll see their work happening across the state of North Carolina. As I conclude this presentation of the State of the Black Alliance, we have to remember that voter safety and protection is paramount. We cannot talk about election protection if we're not protecting the voter first and foremost. In 2020, we provided over 150,000 PPE kits to voters. Now, in the midst of COVID-19, we have to make sure we're going a step beyond and assisting voters in completing absentee ballots where they're still cautious about being in person. And in this midst of disinformation, in the midst of racist voter intimidation, we have to make sure that we're standing up a network of grassroots leaders and of attorneys that can help assist in triage in the moment of pandemic in the political process. And so at this point, we are engaged in a massive statewide campaign to ensure that voters are protected at the polls against all the different elements that could meet them at the polling place. And we're asking you to go to safevoternc.org for more information about that program. Coming up immediately after the summit, we have tons of things happening in our constituent groups. And one of the biggest events that we have post the Black Summit is our Divine Nine Legislative Day. We're encouraging all members of the Divine Nine to join us again for this virtual format in 2021. Over 2,000 individuals from the Divine Nine joined us for a day of legislative advocacy, and we're coming back in a virtual format to make sure that we understand the impetus of this election and what's at stake, not just on the ballot, but at the General Assembly when they go about dividing the funding based on the budget for North Carolina. And also, I mentioned earlier, we need your input, and you'll see this slide one more time, asking you to please fill out the Board of Black Elected Officials survey. Already have seen it in your inbox and your email. If you need to get to that survey, you can just click this link. We'll make sure you put it in the chat and the code as well. And we really want to thank you all for your tireless efforts across the state. No one knows the amount of work that you put in inside and outside of your role as elected official. And the best thing that we can do in this moment of uncertainty is work together, build together, strategize together, be in community together, and figure out our way past this primary into a bright midterm election season where we could see history being made yet again. It's not just about how much we turn out, but it's about how educated we are as we go to the ballot box. And we're excited to usher in every single year new Black elected officials and also support those of you that are in office that need the assistance, those community organizations that need the support. And as we close out this North Carolina Black Summit virtual experience, we want to thank you all for the 2 days that you have taken to be with us in community. And we remain committed to being with you even after the days of the Black Summit into the midterm election year, making sure that we are building Black political power across the state of North Carolina as an example of our historical journey and of our current struggle in which we have always been able to build Black power in uncertain times. This concludes our State of the Summit, and this also is the last session of the 2022 North Carolina Black Summit virtual experience. On behalf of LaMisha, on behalf of the entire board and staff of the North Carolina Black Alliance, we thank you so much for joining us and participating, and we hope that you have a good and safe election cycle. Take somebody with you to the polls, spread the information that you've seen here, and we'll be sure to follow back up with you for information regarding our 2023 North Carolina Black Summit. And guess what? It's not going to be a virtual experience. We will be in person. We'll be ready to go and be empowered. But until then, we bid you all farewell, be safe, take care.